The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Morning light spilled across the marble floor, reflecting off glass walls that whispered of power and precision. Grace Whitmore adjusted the strap of her worn leather bag and drew in a slow breath, the scent of roasted coffee drifting from the lobby below, mixed with the faint polish of steel and rain. Have you ever stepped into a place that made you feel both invisible and exposed at the same time? She smoothed her resume, palms slightly damp, and glanced at the glowing number on the elevator panel. 50th floor. She was supposed to go to the 45th, but nerves blur logic, and this morning, every floor felt like a mountain. The hallway ahead gleamed, silent except for the click of her heels. A door marked Executive Office, E. Caldwell stood open. She knocked once. A low voice said, "Come in." Inside, a man looked up from behind a mahogany desk-sharp suit, steel gray eyes, presence so commanding it made the air shift. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then, with quiet certainty, he said, "You're late." The contract was signed weeks ago. Grace froze, caught between apology and disbelief. She thought she'd come for a job interview. He thought she was something else entirely. And that's how it began the morning that would change both of their lives forever. The revolving doors of Caldwell Tower spun slow and silent, catching the reflection of the morning sun. Outside, Chicago's winter air still carried a trace of frost, but inside, everything gleamed glass, chrome, marble. The scent of espresso drifted from the cafe in the lobby, mixing with the faint polish of floor wax. Grace Whitmore paused at the reception desk, smoothing the sleeve of her thrift store blazer. Her breath made a small cloud against the glass as she whispered to herself, "You can do this." The woman behind the counter looked up with a polite smile. "Interview." Grace nodded, clutching the folder against her chest. "For the executive assistant position, Caldwell Holdings, 45th floor," the woman said. "Elevators to your left." Grace thanked her and stepped toward the mirrored doors, heart thudding like a second heartbeat in her chest. She'd spent the bus ride rehearsing answers, her strengths, her weaknesses, why she'd make a good fit. None of those rehearsals had prepared her for how much this building felt like another world. Everything shimmered with quiet money, the kind that never rushed, never apologized. She pressed the elevator button. The soft ding echoed, followed by a polite voice. "Going up." Grace stepped in, surrounded by strangers in tailored suits. Someone's cologne smelled like cedar and authority. She stood a little straighter. When the others exited, she stayed, eyes on the numbers climbing, 43, 44, 45. The doors didn't open. The elevator kept moving. Her stomach dipped as it stopped at 50. She frowned, checking the paper in her hand. Caldwell Holdings, 45th floor. But nerves blur logic, and pride whispers, "Maybe there's another office upstairs." She stepped out. The hallway was different here, quieter, carpet softer, walls lined with abstract art in muted gray and silver. No reception desk, just a row of dark wooden doors with engraved brass plates. She hesitated, listening to the hush. Somewhere, faintly, a clock ticked. One door stood slightly open. Executive Office, E. Caldwell. She knocked once. "Come in." The voice was low, calm, almost bored. She pushed the door open and froze. The office was enormous, walled with glass that framed the skyline like a living painting. A man sat behind a mahogany desk, sleeves rolled to his elbows, pen poised over a stack of documents. His hair was dark, slightly disheveled, and his eyes steel gray, sharp lifted to meet hers. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. Grace stepped forward, clearing her throat. "Good morning. I'm here for—" "You're late," he interrupted, his tone cutting but not loud. "The contract was signed weeks ago." Her mouth opened, closed. "Excuse me." He leaned back, studying her like she was a puzzle piece that didn't fit but somehow belonged. My grandfather's assistant said you'd arrive at 9 sharp. It's 9:30? Grace blinked, trying to keep up. I think there's been a mistake. I'm here to interview for the interview. His brow lifted slightly, disbelief softening into something almost amused. Is that what we're calling it now? She laughed nervously. Yes, the secretarial position. He stood, tall enough to make her feel small, though not in a cruel way, just by presence alone. Miss Whitmore, isn't it? Her breath caught. How do you... Your resume, he said, opening a file on his desk. Grace Ann Whitmore, bachelor's in communications, minor in business. Your father, Richard Whitmore, once worked in legal consulting for Caldwell Industries. Grace froze. The name hit like cold water. My father died. Years ago. Something flickered in his eyes. Confusion. Then calculation. He looked down at the papers again, then back at her. That's impossible. You're listed as his daughter, the one meant to finalize the agreement. What agreement he didn't answer right away? Instead, he walked to the window, the city sprawling below like a map of decisions. My grandfather's estate. The terms require a merger, a symbolic one. He turned to her. A marriage. Grace's lips parted. A marriage. He nodded once, matter of fact. You're supposed to be my fiancé. The words hung in the air, absurd and heavy. Grace let out a small laugh, half disbelief, half panic. I think you've got the wrong person. I just came for a job interview. He studied her again, slower this time. The way she clutched her folder, the nervous bite on her lower lip, the earnestness that didn't match the kind of woman who'd walk into a contract marriage. Something softened in his expression, though his voice remained steady. Then, why did my grandfather's lawyer send me your file? Grace shook her head, the room suddenly spinning. I don't know. Maybe there's another Grace Whitmore somewhere out there. He exhaled, a long, measured breath. Apparently there is. For a few seconds, silence filled the room, the hum of the city beyond the glass, the faint tick of the clock on the wall. Grace wanted to disappear, to melt into the marble floor and start the day over. But something about his gaze held her there, rooted. She tried to step back toward the door. I'll just find HR. He spoke again, quieter now. Wait. She turned. Since you're already here, he said, eyes narrowing slightly. What did you expect to find? Grace hesitated. A chance. His brows drew together. A chance to prove I'm worth hiring, she said simply. Even if my resume doesn't shine, for the first time. His expression shifted, not quite a smile, but not cold either. He looked at her as if weighing something invisible. You walked into the wrong office, he said softly, but maybe not by accident. Grace didn't know what he meant, and she wasn't sure she wanted to. The air felt charged, like the seconds before a storm. She reached for the doorknob, her pulse quickening. Behind her, his voice came again low, deliberate. You're late, he repeated. The contract was signed weeks ago. The words echoed through the quiet room, sinking into her like a riddle. Grace stepped into the hallway, the door closing gently behind her. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart stumble. Somehow, she knew her morning. Her life had just taken a turn she couldn't name yet. And somewhere, inside that office of glass and steel, Ethan Caldwell was already rethinking everything he thought he understood about fate. The elevator doors closed softly behind her, sealing the hum of the city away. Grace leaned against the cool wall of the hallway, trying to steady her breath. Her pulse still hadn't slowed from the way that man Ethan Caldwell. She'd read the name on the office door, had looked at her, as if he'd been waiting for her all his life. Or worse, as if she already belonged to him. Before she could walk away, his voice cut through the air again. Miss Whitmore. It wasn't a question, it was command. Grace turned. He stood by the doorway, sleeves still rolled up, eyes locked on her like a man certain of what he saw. I think, she began carefully, You've mistaken me for someone else. Ethan didn't flinch. Unlikely. He held up the folder from his desk. Your background. Your degree. Even the name of your late father. It's all here. Exactly as my grandfather's lawyer described. Grace took a step closer, her confusion tightening like a knot in her chest. That can't be possible. I applied for a secretarial job online. I don't know your grandfather or any lawyer. He studied her face, calm but unyielding. Then explain this, he said, sliding a document across the desk. A marriage arrangement filed 2 months ago. Richard Whitmore's daughter, Grace Ann Whitmore, to enter into a legal partnership with Ethan Caldwell as part of Edward Caldwell's inheritance conditions. The words blurred for a moment. Grace could barely breathe. This is absurd. I've never even heard of this. Ethan's tone sharpened. It's not absurd, it's binding. My grandfather's will requires that I be married before the next board meeting to retain controlling shares. That marriage, he said evenly, was arranged with you. Grace's laugh came out small, shaky. You're serious. Do I look like I joke about business? She stared at him. Then there must be another Grace Whitmore. He paused, as if considering the possibility for the first time. The idea unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Maybe, he said slowly, but my team verified every detail. Her voice dropped, almost trembling. How do you know all this about me? Ethan met her eyes. Because you're supposed to be my fiancé. The silence that followed was heavy enough to fill the room. Outside, the muted sound of traffic rose and fell, a reminder that somewhere beyond this strange encounter, life was still ordinary. Grace shook her head. I think I should leave before this gets any stranger. She turned toward the door, but Ethan's tone stopped her again, quieter now, almost uncertain. Wait, if you didn't know about this, then someone used your name? Someone wanted you here. Grace hesitated, the weight of his words pressing against her back. Why would anyone do that? He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted toward the window, the skyline glowing through faint clouds. My grandfather's been ill. He wanted to ensure the company stayed in the family, no matter the cost. Maybe someone thought they could manipulate that. Grace folded her arms, trying to gather her composure. So, what you think I'm part of, some elaborate con? His eyes flicked back to her. I think you're standing in my office with the same name, the same background, and the same face as the woman who disappeared 3 weeks ago. And I don't believe in coincidence. The word disappeared hit her like a chill. You're saying she's missing? He nodded once. The real Grace Whitmore. If you're not her, vanished before the contract was finalized. The lawyers lost contact. Her phone was disconnected. And now, you show up at the exact hour she was expected. Grace's voice came out smaller than she intended. I didn't know. I swear. Ethan's expression softened barely, but enough to make her chest tighten. Then you really are just a secretary applicant with the same name. She nodded. He exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. You have terrible timing, Miss Whitmore. I gathered that, she said quietly. For a moment, the tension cracked just enough for her to notice the faint humor in his tone, the fatigue behind his eyes. He looked like a man who'd been carrying something too heavy for too long. Grace hesitated, wanting to step back, but feeling oddly drawn in. What happens now? He glanced at the clock on the wall. Now, I have a meeting I can't reschedule. And you, he gestured toward the door, should probably go before this becomes tomorrow's headline. Her chest tightened at the dismissal. Right? But before she reached the handle, his voice found her again. Miss Whitmore, he said softly, almost reluctantly, you said your father died. She turned, her fingers still on the cool metal of the door. He did? How long ago? 5 years, she said, her voice low. Heart failure. Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked genuinely unsettled now. Then someone forged his signature on legal documents 6 months ago. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her. That's impossible. He met her gaze. So is this morning. For the first time, neither of them spoke. Only the faint hum of the city filled the silence between them. Grace could feel the shift the moment when disbelief gave way to something deeper. Fear, curiosity, fate. She stepped back slowly, the edge of her folder pressing into her chest. "Mr. Caldwell?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever this is, I want no part of it." He studied her, his gray eyes unreadable. "You already are, Miss Whitmore. You just don't know it yet." Her pulse quickened. "You're wrong." He tilted his head slightly, a trace of doubt shadowing his expression. "Am I?" Grace swallowed hard, every instinct telling her to run, but her feet wouldn't move. There was something in his voice, in the strange certainty that made her wonder if walking out would really end it. She turned finally, hand shaking as she opened the door. The hallway felt colder now, the quiet heavier, behind her. His voice echoed one last time, quiet but steady. "Find out who sent you here, Grace, before they find you again." She froze, then stepped into the hall. The door clicked shut behind her like a closing chapter. The elevator ride down was endless. She watched the numbers fall, 49, 48, 47 each one, pulling her further from logic, deeper into the ache of uncertainty. When the doors opened at the lobby, the city greeted her with sunlight and noise, as if nothing unusual had happened. But everything inside her had shifted. She stepped onto the marble floor, the scent of coffee drifting past, familiar and safe. Only it wasn't safe anymore. Nothing was. She pressed a hand to her chest, whispering as though to herself. "My father died years ago," then softer, almost like a prayer. "You've got the wrong woman." That night, Chicago's skyline shimmered against the glass walls of Ethan's office, city lights flickering like restless thoughts. He hadn't left the building since morning. The document still lay spread across his desk, his tie long forgotten on the floor. On the screen, two names glowed side by side: Grace Ann Whitmore, both with identical birth dates, both tied, somehow, to the Caldwell family will. One had vanished, the other had walked into his life by mistake. He rubbed his temples, exhaustion shadowing his face. The board meeting was in less than 2 weeks, if he didn't present a marriage certificate by then. The company his grandfather built would fall into the hands of men who saw profit but not purpose. Nathan, his charming cousin, already had allies waiting. Ethan couldn't afford failure. He clicked open another file, financial reports, medical invoices, even background checks. His gut twisted as he saw something he hadn't noticed before: an emergency contact address under the same name. A modest neighborhood on the city's south side. A woman named Mary Whitmore listed as dependent. He sat back, realization dawning. She wasn't lying. The next morning, Grace woke to the thin light creeping through her apartment blinds. Bills sat piled on the kitchen counter. Her mother's medicine bottles lined the windowsill like quiet reminders. The hospital had called again, another postponement on surgery, another payment due. Grace poured herself coffee, though her hands trembled too much to hold the cup steady. She stared at the faint steam rising and whispered, "There's always a way. There has to be." Her phone buzzed. Unknown number? She hesitated, then answered. "Miss Whitmore," a voice said, calm, certain. "It's Ethan Caldwell." Her stomach sank. "How did you get my number? From your resume?" A pause. "We need to talk." Grace almost laughed. "About what mistaken identity you've made that clear." "About opportunity," he said simply. Something in his tone made her stop. 2 hours later, she was back inside Caldwell Tower. The same marble floors, the same scent of espresso and polish. But this time, her steps felt heavier. When she entered his office, Ethan stood by the window, sleeves rolled, eyes on the city below. He didn't turn. "I verified your story." "Congratulations," she said softly. "So now you know I'm not your fiancé." "I know," he replied, turning toward her. "But I also know I need one. Grace blinked. "I'm sorry I need a wife before the next board meeting," he said, his voice steady, businesslike. "It's in my grandfather's will. No marriage, no control of the company." She stared at him, unsure if he was joking. "So, you're asking me to marry you because of a deadline?" "Yes." Her breath caught in her throat. "That's insane. It's practical. You don't even know me. I know enough." He crossed the room, stopping just close enough for her to see the faint shadows under his eyes. "You're responsible. You care for your mother. You're struggling. But you keep going. You don't seem the type to exploit anyone. That's more than I can say for most people I know." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks, part anger, part disbelief. "You ran a background check on me. I did my research," he admitted. "It's what I do." She stepped back, shaking her head. "You're unbelievable." He didn't argue. Instead, he walked to his desk, picked up a single sheet of paper, and slid it toward her. 1 year, a legal arrangement, you'll be compensated generously. Afterward, you can walk away clean, anonymous, and wealthy. Grace stared at the words, her pulse pounding in her ears. A contract marriage. Her first instinct was to leave. But her mind betrayed her, flashing through images she couldn't ignore, her mother lying pale in a hospital bed. The bills stacked higher every week, the fear of losing everything they had left. She took a breath, her voice barely steady. "You think money fixes everything?" "No," Ethan said quietly. "But it can buy time. And right now, we're both running out of it." His honesty startled her. Beneath the arrogance, there was something raw, desperation, maybe, or loneliness that looked too much like her own. The clock ticked between them, filling the silence. "I don't even know what to say," Grace whispered. "Say you'll consider it." She looked at him, at the man who, less than 24 hours ago, had accused her of deceit. Now he was offering her something equally impossible. "What happens if I say no?" He exhaled. "Then I lose everything I've worked for. And if I say yes, then you become Mrs. Caldwell for 1 year." Grace turned away, her throat tight. She could almost hear her mother's voice. Never trade your dignity for comfort. But comfort wasn't what she wanted. She wanted safety, a chance to save the only family she had left. Ethan watched her, his expression unreadable. "I won't force you, but I think you already know your answer." Her fingers trembled against the folder she carried. "You don't know me well enough to say that." He smiled faintly, though there was no joy in it. "I know what survival looks like." For a moment, their eyes met his steady, hers uncertain. Somewhere between them, a quiet understanding settled. Grace felt her pride war with her fear. To agree would mean surrendering control, stepping into a lie that might swallow her whole. To refuse would mean letting her mother's life depend on luck and overdue payments. Her heart ached with the weight of both choices. The city outside glowed in late afternoon light. Traffic hummed below, 1,000 lives moving forward while hers hung suspended in one impossible moment. Ethan finally spoke, his voice softer now. "You don't have to decide tonight." Grace didn't answer. She was staring at the window, at the reflection of herself beside him, two strangers bound by circumstance, already tethered to something they didn't understand. When she finally turned to face him, her voice was barely more than a whisper. "If I say yes..." He waited. "I want everything in writing." Ethan's expression didn't change, but a faint flicker of relief passed through his eyes, quick as a heartbeat. "Of course," he said. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Grace looked down at her trembling hands. The contract might save her mother's life. But somewhere deep inside, she already knew it might cost her own. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Black ink, gold trim, a weight made for men who sign deals worth millions. Grace held it between her fingers, staring at the neat stack of papers before her. The words blurred terms, allowances, obligations, every line cold, precise, final. The lawyers spoke in quiet tones around the polished oak table, their sentences clipped and legal. It didn't sound like marriage. It sounded like ownership. Ethan sat across from her, silent, his posture perfect, his expression unreadable. Only once did his eyes lift to meet hers, and even then, it was quick, like checking the weather before deciding to go out. He didn't look cruel, just detached, as if this, too, was business. One of the lawyers cleared his throat. Miss Whitmore, page 9, section 3. This outlines your compensation, living arrangements, and confidentiality terms. Grace turned the page. The black print stared back. Monthly stipend, non-disclosure clause, a 1-year duration. It felt less like a promise and more like a prison dressed in fine language. Her hand trembled slightly as she signed the first page. The sound of pen against paper echoed louder than it should have. Ethan noticed. His gaze flickered, almost imperceptibly, toward her hand. He didn't speak, but something in his jaw tightened. When it was done, the lawyer gathered the papers with care, sliding them into a folder. "Congratulations," he said, smiling as if someone had just closed a merger. Grace tried to return the gesture, but failed. After they left, silence filled the office again. Grace rose from her chair, her voice soft. "That's it." Ethan looked up from the folder. "That's it." She waited for something more. Thank you. Maybe, or reassurance." Nothing came. So she turned to leave, but just before the door, his voice stopped her. "There's a driver outside. He'll take you home." She nodded without looking back. Outside, the cold air bit her cheeks. The city lights shimmered through thin mist. She sat in the back seat of the car, watching reflections slide past the window. Her signature had changed her life, but not in any way she'd ever imagined. When the car stopped in front of her apartment, she hesitated before getting out. Her mother's light was still on. Inside, the air smelled faintly of chamomile tea and medicine. Mary Whitmore sat in her chair by the window, her gray hair loose around her shoulders, a soft blanket over her legs. "Sweetheart," she said, smiling. "You're home late." Grace forced a small smile. "Long day." Mary tilted her head. "You look tired. Did the interview go well?" Grace hesitated. The lie came out smoother than she expected. "It did. They offered me a job." Mary's eyes brightened. "A job? Oh, Grace. That's wonderful." "Doing what corporate assistant," she said quickly. "Nothing glamorous, but steady pay. Benefits, too." Her mother reached for her hand, squeezing it. "You've worked so hard for this. I'm proud of you." Grace felt her throat tighten. "Thanks, Mom." The next morning, she woke early. On the kitchen table sat an envelope, Ethan's first payment, delivered overnight. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a check large enough to erase months of debt. Relief washed through her like warm water, followed by a deep, aching shame. She called the hospital that afternoon, scheduled a surgery. She told the nurse, "We have the funds." When she hung up, tears stung her eyes. For the first time in months, she could breathe. But it wasn't freedom. It was borrowed air. Later that evening, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Grace." Ethan's voice said, calm, composed. "Tomorrow. We have dinner with my grandfather." Her stomach turned. "Dinner. He wants to meet you." "Meet me," she repeated softly. "The fake wife. The future Mrs. Caldwell," he corrected, though his tone wasn't mocking, just factual. Grace swallowed hard. "And what exactly am I supposed to say to him?" "Nothing," Ethan said. "My grandfather likes honesty. Just don't tell him everything." Her silence stretched. He added, "He's not a fool. But he's kind. You'll like him." Grace exhaled slowly. "Does he know no?" Ethan said. "And he doesn't need to." The line went quiet for a few seconds. Then, unexpectedly, his voice softened. "You did well today." She frowned. "Signing a contract, walking through it?" He said. "Most people would have run." Grace looked down at the table, the check still there, her mother's laughter drifting faintly from the living room. "Maybe I should have." He didn't respond, only said, "Tomorrow, 6 o'clock, the car will pick you up." She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Fine, Grace," he said after a pause. "Try to look like someone worth marrying." The line clicked. Silence returned. Grace sat still for a long moment, staring at the city lights outside her window. They flickered like 1,000 unasked questions. She whispered into the quiet, "And what does someone worth marrying even look like?" Her voice faded into the hum of the night. Somewhere across the city, Ethan stood in front of the same skyline, a glass of scotch untouched in his hand. He told himself it was business. He told himself it didn't matter. But he found himself wondering, for the first time in years, what kind of woman agreed to sign her name beside his, and why her eyes had trembled when she did. Outside, the city kept moving, uncaring, but inside two very different apartments, neither of them slept. The car turned off the main highway and into a long, tree-lined road that curved through the quiet edges of Lake Forest. The sun was sinking behind the woods, painting the sky in faint streaks of amber and rose. Grace sat in the back seat, hands folded tightly in her lap, trying not to fidget with the hem of her dress. The scent of pine drifted in through the open window. It was clean, grounding and still. Her chest felt tight. When the gates of the Caldwell estate opened, she caught her breath. The house rose beyond the drive, like something from another time, stone walls wrapped in ivy, windows glowing soft gold in the fading light. Smoke curled gently from a chimney. It looked less like a mansion and more like a memory of one. Ethan sat beside her, as still as ever. His gaze stayed ahead, fixed on the road. The silence between them carried a pulse of unspoken tension. When the car stopped before the grand porch, he finally said, "He's expecting us." Grace gave a faint nod, her voice small. "Any last-minute instructions?" His eyes flicked to her, unreadable. "Just be yourself." "That hasn't worked out very well lately," she murmured. A ghost of a smile touched his lips there. Then gone. Inside, the warmth hit her first. The scent of burning wood and something faintly sweet vanilla, or perhaps old books. Portraits lined the hallway, generations of Caldwells staring down in quiet judgment. But the living room, with its fire crackling gently, softened everything. Edward Caldwell sat in an armchair near the hearth, a blanket across his knees, a cup of tea steaming on the side table. His hair was silver, his eyes bright and steady. When he saw them, he smiled, the kind that reached all the way to his eyes. "So," he said, his voice warm, "this must be Grace." Grace stepped forward, unsure whether to curtsy or shake his hand. She settled for a polite smile. "It's lovely to meet you, Mr. Caldwell," he chuckled. "Edward, please, Mr. Caldwell sounds like my father, and he's been gone a long time." Something about his tone eased her shoulders. She could breathe again. They moved to the dining room, a place that felt lived in, despite its grandeur. The table was set simply, candles flickering low. No servants lingered, only a kind-faced housekeeper who served and disappeared quietly. Dinner began with small talk. Edward asked about her childhood, her favorite books, what she liked to cook. Grace answered honestly, carefully. She told him about her mother, about growing up near the city, about learning to make soup from whatever was left in the pantry. He laughed at that softly, kindly. At one point, he said, "You have a gentleness about you, Grace, rare these days." She smiled, cheeks warming. I think kindness runs in your family." Her eyes flicked to Ethan. He was cutting his steak, expression unreadable. But when he looked up, there was a faint flicker, something like surprise. Edward noticed it too. His eyes twinkled. "My grandson's not used to compliments. Be careful. He might start expecting them." Ethan looked faintly exasperated. Grace bit back a laugh. For a moment, the tension broke. The room felt lighter, filled with the kind of ease that couldn't be forced. As dessert was served, Edward leaned back, studying her quietly. "I must say," he said at last, "I wasn't sure what to expect, but I'm pleasantly surprised." Grace's smile faltered, unsure what to say. She felt a strange pang in her chest. Guilt. Maybe he believed this. Believed her. Edward continued, his tone softer now. "You care for him already, don't you?" Grace's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Ethan's voice cut in, smooth and controlled. "Grandfather." Edward held up a hand. "Relax. Ethan, I'm old, not blind. You don't have to hide everything from me." The silence that followed was heavy, but not sharp. Grace looked down at her plate, her pulse quick. She wanted to say something honest, but honesty didn't belong here. "Instead," she said softly, "I just want him to be happy." Edward's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer. Then he smiled, small and knowing. "Good answer." When dinner ended, the housekeeper cleared the plates and left them by the fire with tea and soft music playing somewhere in the background. Grace wandered toward a shelf of books, running her fingers lightly along the spines. "You've collected quite a library," she said. Edward chuckled. "A lifetime of pretending to understand philosophy." She smiled, turning to face him. "I think that's what philosophy's for." He laughed at that, full and warm. The sound filled the room like light. Ethan stood by the mantel, watching quietly. Grace could feel his eyes on her, though she didn't look back. Later, when Edward excused himself to rest, he stopped beside Ethan, resting a hand on his grandson's arm. "A word," he said softly. They stepped out into the hallway. The firelight flickered against the walls. The house quiet now, except for the soft ticking of a clock. Edward studied his grandson's face for a long moment before speaking. "She's different," he said. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "She's decent? That's all." Edward shook his head. "No, she's more than that. And so are you when she's near." Ethan frowned. "You don't know her." "I don't need to." Edward smiled faintly. "I can see it." Ethan looked away, uneasy under his grandfather's gaze. "This isn't what you think." "Maybe not," Edward said gently. "But for the first time in years, you look like a man who's found peace." Ethan didn't answer. Edward gave his arm a squeeze, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't let pride ruin it, son. Life's too short." When Ethan finally looked up, his grandfather had already turned away, moving slowly down the hall. The scent of pine and smoke followed him, fading with each step. Ethan stood there for a long moment, alone in the soft light, trying not to think about the truth in those words. And in the next room, Grace sat by the dying fire, staring into the flames, wondering why a house built on secrets could feel, for the first time in years, like home. Snow flurried lightly outside the small stone chapel, catching the morning light like scattered glass. Inside, the air smelled faintly of pine and old wood polish. Candles flickered along the pews, their soft glow tracing the edges of white lace and polished shoes. Grace stood near the front, her hands clasped around a small bouquet of ivory roses. Her dress was simple, no train, no sparkle, just soft satin that whispered when she moved. It had been chosen by a stylist she didn't know, for a ceremony that didn't feel hers. Ethan stood a few feet away, immaculate in a dark suit, his tie perfectly straight, his posture too composed to be natural. His face gave nothing away. Only his eyes betrayed him restless, sharp, shifting between her and the minister like a man counting seconds instead of promises. The officiant cleared his throat gently. "We are gathered here today." Grace barely heard the words. Her heart pounded loud in her ears. Every vow, every phrase about love and devotion felt heavy and hollow. She wasn't a bride, she was a solution, wrapped in ivory and fear. Still, when Ethan looked at her, really looked, something in his gaze softened. Just a flicker. But it made her chest ache. Maybe it was pity, or maybe it was the first crack in his armor. "Do you, Ethan Caldwell, take this woman?" His voice was steady. "I do. Do you?" Grace Whitmore. She hesitated. The pause stretched long enough for her breath to catch. Then quietly, "I do." The words didn't sound like hers, but the moment they left her mouth, the world seemed as still. When the officiant asked for the rings, Ethan's hand brushed hers, just a light, accidental touch. Yet warmth bloomed from that single contact, strange and disarming. He slipped the ring onto her finger, gold gleaming faintly against her skin. His hand lingered one heartbeat too long. "You may kiss the bride?" Grace froze. She hadn't thought that far. She expected a polite formality, a brush of lips for the cameras that weren't even there. But Ethan hesitated too, his jaw tight as though the air between them carried weight. He leaned in slowly, his eyes searching hers for permission. For a moment, she thought she might step back. Instead, she closed her eyes. The kiss was soft, unexpectedly real. No audience, no flash of pretense. Just warmth and the faint scent of cedar and winter air. Her breath caught halfway through. It lasted barely a second, but when he drew back, the space between them felt changed, like something had been silently rewritten. He looked away first. "It's done." His tone was quiet, almost careful. Grace nodded, though her voice wouldn't come. Her pulse was still racing, her lips tingling where his had been. They signed the final document in the chapel's small study. The ink dried beside a vase of white lilies. The lawyer folded the papers neatly, congratulated them, and left. For a long while, neither spoke. The only sound was the crackle of a small fireplace near the window. Grace stared at her reflection in the glass. The ivory gown made her look like someone she didn't know, a stranger wearing her own face. Ethan stood behind her, his reflection ghosted beside hers. "You did well," he said quietly. She turned, her voice thin. "Do you say that to all your business partners?" His mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. Only the brave ones. The humor didn't reach his eyes. He looked tired, older than his years. Grace wondered if the deal weighed on him too. Outside, the snow fell harder, covering the world in quiet. They left the chapel together, the cold air biting at their skin. The driver opened the car door, but before Grace stepped inside, she glanced back. The chapel looked small against the endless white two strangers had just promised forever inside it, and somehow it felt both too much and not enough. During the ride, silence stretched between them. The car heater hummed softly. Grace watched the snow gather on the windshield, melting into slow rivulets. At last, she spoke. "You didn't have to make it so real." Ethan turned slightly toward her. The kiss. She nodded. He looked ahead again. It was part of the act. She wanted to believe that. She really did. But her heart whispered something else entirely. Back at the estate, Edward was waiting by the fireplace. When he saw them enter, his face broke into a smile that filled the room with warmth. "Ah," he said, standing slowly, "so it's true. My grandson finally settled down." Ethan moved to steady him, but Edward waved him off, his eyes fixed on Grace. "You look beautiful, my dear, and happy." Grace's throat tightened. "Thank you," she said softly. Edward reached for her hand. "I wish your parents could see you today." Her smile faltered for just a second. "So do I." He patted her fingers gently. "Make sure my grandson remembers what a gift he's been given." Ethan looked away, jaw tense. "I'll remember, later, when Edward retired for the night." Grace stood near the window, staring out at the snow-covered gardens. The air in the room was still warm from the fire, but she felt cold inside. Ethan joined her quietly, hands in his pockets. "You played your part perfectly." She turned, eyes steady. "I wasn't acting." He studied her face for a long moment, unsure how to respond. "Neither was I," he admitted finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Something inside her shifted at that. She looked away quickly, afraid to trust it. The silence between them thickened, soft but charged. He moved closer, just enough for her to feel his presence, his warmth. "Grace," he said, almost tenderly, "you don't have to pretend for me." She met his gaze, her voice a whisper. "I'm not pretending for you. I'm pretending for everyone else." Outside, snow kept falling, soft and endless. He reached for her hand, hesitated halfway, then let it fall. "Get some rest," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, everything begins." She watched him leave, his footsteps fading down the hall, alone by the fire. Grace touched her lips, remembering the kiss she couldn't forget. The echo of it lingered, warm and confusing. She closed her eyes, whispering to the quiet room. This was supposed to be pretend, so why did it feel like the truth? Morning came wrapped in glass and silence. Grace woke to the soft hum of the city below, light spilling across the edge of a white silk duvet. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The sheet smelled faintly of cedar and something crisp money. Maybe if it had a scent. The penthouse stretched wide and spotless, every surface smooth, untouched, like no one truly lived there. Ethan was already gone, his side of the bed untouched, as if he'd never been there at all. She found a note on the kitchen counter in his narrow handwriting. "Meeting till late. Dinner at 7. No greeting, no signature, just schedule. The apartment itself was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the corner of the skyline, letting in endless views of Lake Michigan, blue and cold beneath the winter light. Marble counters gleamed under recessed bulbs. Art hung perfectly straight, every frame spaced evenly like the room had been measured by precision, not feeling. Grace moved through it quietly, her footsteps echoing. She ran her fingers along the surface of the dining table, smooth as ice. No crumbs, no warmth, just reflection. She caught her own face staring back and smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. This was supposed to be safety, she thought, stability. But safety didn't always feel like home. Her old apartment had been tiny, the kind of place where the walls hummed when the neighbor's TV got too loud, where the kitchen smelled like coffee and detergent and life. She missed that hum. She missed the noise. Here, silence pressed against her like a weight. At 7, as promised. Ethan returned. His tie loosened, jacket slung over his arm. He moved with that same quiet efficiency, every gesture economical. "Dinner's ready," he said. She blinked. "You cooked ordered," he replied, setting 2 plates on the island counter. "But I heated it up myself, so that counts for something." Grace smiled. "That's debatable." For the first time, she saw a flash of amusement in his expression, quick, almost shy, before it vanished. They ate in near silence after that. The clink of cutlery, the city's heartbeat outside. Grace glanced up now and then, catching him watching her. Not intensely, just curiously, like he was still trying to figure out who she really was. After dinner, she gathered the plates. He reached to help. "You don't have to," she said quickly. He paused. Force of habit. Grace turned on the faucet, warm water rushing over her hands. The domestic rhythm felt almost normal. Too normal for what they were. Later that night, she sat on the couch, staring at the skyline. The city lights glittered like promises just out of reach. Her phone buzzed a message from her mother. How's the new job? Honey, are they treating you well? Grace typed back, everything's good. Mom, don't worry about me. She hesitated before sending it, then pressed send anyway. The lie felt heavy, but comforting. Behind her, soft footsteps approached. Ethan stood holding 2 mugs of tea, steam curling up in slow spirals. Couldn't sleep, he asked. She shook her head. Too quiet. He handed her a cup. Chamomile. The good kind. My mother used to make it when I was a kid. Grace took it carefully, fingers brushing his. Thank you. They sat side by side, facing the city. The tea was warm, the silence gentler now. She glanced at him, the glow from the window softening the hard lines of his face. You ever get tired of it? She asked. Of what this? She said, gesturing at the view. All of it. The glass. The distance. The perfection. He considered that for a moment. It's easier to control things when they're perfect. But you can't control loneliness, she said softly. He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to the skyline, to the endless rows of lights that blinked and disappeared into fog. No, he said finally. You can't. They sat quietly after that. The hum of the city rose through the glass, a faint lullaby of sirens and wind. Grace sipped her tea, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. It reminded her of evenings at home, her mother humming softly while the kettle whistled. She wondered what Ethan's home had been like before all this. What kind of boy grew into a man who needed contracts to feel safe? When she turned to look at him again, he was already watching her. Their eyes met, and something unspoken lingered there, something too fragile to name. She smiled, small and tired. You don't have to keep pretending to be polite. You know, I can take care of myself. I'm not pretending, he said. I just don't know what else to be. Her chest ached at the honesty in his voice. He set his cup down, stood, and walked toward the window. The city spread beneath them, endless, shimmering, distant. His reflection hovered beside the skyline, tall and still. You see that, he said quietly. Everything looks perfect from up here until you realize no one's beside you. Grace didn't answer. She just watched him, her fingers curling around the cooling mug. Outside, the snow began again, soft, slow, silent. And somewhere between the city lights and the quiet of that room, Grace realized how dangerous it was to start caring for a man who didn't believe in love. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, every light catching on sequins, champagne glasses, and polite smiles. Music drifted softly through the air, something classical, expensive, forgettable. Grace stood at Ethan's side, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her smile practiced but kind. From the outside, they looked perfect. From the inside, she could feel the strain beneath the surface, like glass under too much pressure. Ethan moved through the crowd with the ease of a man born to command it. He shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, nodded at names that carried weight. Grace followed his lead, laughing when expected, answering questions about their honeymoon and future plans with soft deflections. No one doubted them. That was the trick perfection, rehearsed and believable. Yet when she caught his reflection in the mirrored wall, she saw it, the tightness around his eyes, the exhaustion in his smile. He could fool everyone else, but not her. During dinner, the chandeliers dimmed. Waiters moved like shadows, pouring wine, clearing plates. The hum of conversation softened into comfort. Then, from across the room, a voice cut through the warmth. Well, if it isn't the happy couple. Ethan's shoulders stiffened. Grace turned to see a man approaching, tall and effortlessly confident, his smile charming in the way that felt just a little dangerous. Nathan Caldwell. She recognized him from a framed photo at Edward's estate, Ethan's cousin. Nathan, Ethan said, his tone polite but cool. I didn't realize you were back from London. Just in time for the festivities, Nathan replied, his gaze sliding toward Grace. and to meet the mysterious Mrs. Caldwell. Grace extended her hand. "It's nice to meet you." Nathan took it, holding her fingers a heartbeat too long. "The pleasure's mine." I was beginning to think my dear cousin would never settle down. Ethan's jaw flexed. "Some things are worth waiting for." Nathan's grin widened. "Oh, I'm sure." The conversation moved on, but tension hung like static in the air. Nathan stayed near, his charm easy and relentless. He complimented Grace's dress, her poise, the way she carried herself. Each word laced with something that wasn't admiration, it was challenge. When Ethan stepped away to speak with a board member, Nathan leaned closer. "You're handling this better than I expected." Grace frowned. "Handling what? This?" He gestured casually toward the room. "The act. The perfect wife routine." Her pulse quickened. "You don't know anything about me." He smiled, slow and knowing. "Maybe not, but I know Ethan. And this emotion between them isn't him." Grace held his gaze, refusing to flinch. "People change." Nathan's eyes softened, but his tone stayed sharp. "Not him. He builds walls, not bridges. If he brought you here, it's for a reason." She opened her mouth to respond, but Ethan returned before she could. His hand brushed her back lightly, a gesture meant for reassurance but carrying quiet possession. "Everything all right?" Nathan smiled easily. "Just getting to know your lovely wife." "I'm sure you are," Ethan said. The air between them cooled several degrees. Grace could feel it, the quiet battle behind polite words. Nathan's eyes glinted with something close to amusement. Ethan's expression didn't move, but his hand lingered against her back longer than before. Later that night, as the gala wound down, Grace stepped outside for a breath of air. The city stretched below, lights reflecting in the glass of the terrace doors. She exhaled, letting the cool wind steal away the noise. Nathan's voice broke the quiet. "You don't belong in there, you know?" She turned. He was leaning against the railing, a glass of champagne in hand, the picture of ease. "What's that supposed to mean?" He tilted his head. "You have warmth. They feed on ice. You'll burn out trying to survive in his world." She crossed her arms. "I didn't realize you cared." He smiled faintly. "I don't. But I care about the company. And if this marriage is a lie, and I think it is, it's only a matter of time before everything unravels." Her heart tightened. "You really don't like him? Do you?" Nathan's gaze drifted toward the skyline. "I respect him. But respect doesn't erase resentment. My father lost everything in that boardroom. Ethan made sure of it." Grace's chest ached. "You're saying this is revenge? Not from me," Nathan said quietly. "From him. He never stops fighting ghosts, even the ones that don't deserve it." The door opened behind them. Ethan stepped out, his voice low and firm. "Nathan, Ethan." Nathan turned, smiling. "We were just enjoying the view." "I can see that," Ethan replied. "Enjoy it elsewhere." Nathan chuckled, swirling his drink, always so territorial. Ethan's tone cooled, always so intrusive. The silence stretched tight. Grace felt caught in the middle of something old and unspoken. The kind of wound time didn't heal. Nathan finished his drink, set it on the railing. "Careful, cousin," he said, stepping closer, his smile fading. "Every empire falls, sometimes from the inside." Then he walked past them, his cologne sharp in the night air. The sound of his footsteps faded into the music behind the glass doors. Grace turned to Ethan. What did he mean by that? Ethan didn't look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the city, distant and hard. "He means what he always does, nothing." But his voice trembled slightly, just enough for her to notice. The lights from the ballroom spilled through the glass, painting their reflections against the night. Ethan's face looked calm, perfect. But behind his eyes, she saw it again. The cracks, faint but growing. He exhaled, barely audible. "Let's go home." Grace nodded softly. As they walked back inside, she glanced once more toward the city below, wondering just how much of what they built, this marriage, this facade, this fragile piece, was already starting to break. The morning light hit the penthouse windows like shards of glass. Grace woke to the sound of her phone buzzing nonstop on the nightstand. A dozen missed calls. Her stomach tightened before she even looked. The first message preview froze her breath. "Have you seen this? I'm so sorry." She opened the link. The headline screamed across the screen, "Gold Digger Bride. How Grace Whitmore Trapped Chicago's Most Eligible CEO." Photos spilled down the page, her face beside Ethan's. Their wedding. Her hand in his at the gala. Her mother's modest house blurred in the background. The captions cut like knives. "Small-town secretary uses marriage to climb into fortune. Sources confirm hidden contract." The room tilted. Her chest clenched. She stumbled to her feet, grabbing her robe, the phone still glowing in her hand. Comment sections scrolled endlessly below, strangers dissecting her life, her looks, her worth. Words like fake, opportunist, liar. She couldn't breathe. By the time Ethan appeared in the doorway, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, shaking. "Grace," he said, voice low, careful. "Don't read that." She laughed, hollow. "A little late for that." He crossed the room, the tension in his face giving away more than his words. "I'll have my team handle it. Handle it." She looked up, eyes wide. "They called my mother's hospital. They hounded my neighbors. They dug up everything, my debt, her illness." What's left to handle? Ethan's jaw tightened. This wasn't supposed to happen. Then who made it happen? He didn't answer, just turned away, hands sliding into his pockets. Silence filled the room again, heavy, electric. Her phone buzzed once more. This time, a call from the hospital. She froze, then answered. "Mrs. Caldwell." A nurse's voice asked, "It's about your mother." Grace's world narrowed to a pinpoint. What happened? She saw the news this morning. She fainted in her room. "She's stable now, but maybe it would be good for her to see you." Her throat closed. "I'll be there." She hung up and grabbed her coat. Ethan moved toward her. "I'll come with you." "No," she said sharply. "You've done enough." "Grace." She turned on him, eyes blazing through tears. Don't say my name like you care. You said this was business. Remember?" He flinched, just barely. "I never wanted you hurt." "Then what did you expect?" Her voice cracked. "You made me your wife on paper. You turned my life into a transaction. What did you think people would call me when they found out he didn't answer?" Grace left without looking back. The drive to the hospital blurred. The city's glass towers loomed over her, reflecting headlines she couldn't escape. By the time she reached her mother's room, her chest ached from holding everything in. Mary lay pale against white sheets, a faint bruise on her temple where she'd fallen. Her eyes opened when Grace entered, weary but kind. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "you're on the news." Grace forced a smile. "Don't believe what they say." "I don't," Mary said softly. "But others will." Grace sat beside her, taking her hand. It felt smaller than she remembered, fragile. "I'll fix this." Mary squeezed her fingers. "You don't have to fix everything, Grace. Just remember who you are." Grace's throat burned. "I don't even know anymore." Mary smiled faintly. "Then start there." For a moment, the world felt still. Just the hum of machines and the soft sound of their breathing. When Grace returned to the penthouse that evening, the lights were low, the air thick with tension. Ethan stood near the window, phone pressed to his ear. His tone was clipped, controlled, angry. "Find out who leaked it. Every source, every outlet. I don't care how much it costs." He ended the call and turned. "It was Nathan," he said flatly. "Has to be." Grace's voice was quiet. "Why would he do that to hurt me? To prove what he's always said, that I ruin everything I touch?" She stared at him. And you think this is about you." He froze. "My mother collapsed," she said, each word trembling. "I've been called names I can't repeat. And you think this is your tragedy?" Ethan's mouth opened, then closed again. Grace took a step closer. Tears bright in her eyes. "I'm tired of being your contract, Ethan. I'm tired of existing only when it benefits you." He looked at her, then really looked, and something in his expression faltered. "That's not fair." "No," she whispered. "It's not, but neither is this life." The quiet between them grew unbearable. She turned to walk away, but his voice followed, low and unguarded. "I never meant for you to get hurt." Grace stopped, her hand trembling on the doorknob. He sounded different this time. Not the cold executive. Not the man who planned every move like a chess piece. Just a man broken, maybe, or lost. She didn't turn around. Intentions don't erase damage. Then she walked out, the soft click of the door echoing in the stillness he left behind. Ethan stood there, staring at the skyline. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual indifference, lights blinking over the dark lake. Inside, for the first time, he realized what Nathan had meant when he said every empire falls. It doesn't always crumble in public. Sometimes, it falls quietly from the inside out. The call came just after midnight. Ethan was still in his office, a glass of untouched bourbon sweating beside a stack of unread reports. When the phone buzzed, his assistant's voice was tense. "It's your grandfather, sir. They've taken him to Lake Forest Hospital. It's serious." He was out the door before the glass stopped ringing on the table. Grace heard the knock minutes later. When she opened the door, Ethan stood there, tie gone, eyes dark, breath uneven. "It's Edward," he said simply, and that was all it took. They drove through the sleeping city in silence, the highway lights flashing across their faces like slow lightning. At the hospital, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain. Machines hummed in rhythm with the steady tick of a wall clock. Edward lay in a narrow bed, pale against the white sheets, oxygen hissing softly beside him. Grace's chest tightened. She'd only known him for a few weeks, but in that time, the old man had felt like an anchor, warm, steady. The only one who'd looked at her and seen more than a deal. She moved to his bedside, her voice soft. "He's going to be all right. Isn't he?" Ethan didn't answer. His gaze stayed fixed on the monitor, watching the lines pulse with measured fragility. Hours passed in slow fragments, the quiet shuffle of nurses, the low beep of the heart monitor, the wind rattling faintly against the window. Grace sat in a chair beside the bed, reading aloud from a book she'd found on the nightstand. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it filled the room like a small light in the dark. Ethan stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes distant. He watched her reflection in the glass more than the city beyond it, the way she turned pages carefully, the way her voice softened on certain words, the way she looked at Edward not like a man of power, but like someone she cared for. He hadn't seen that kind of gentleness in years, maybe ever. When the nurse came to check the machines, Edward stirred, his eyes fluttered open, cloudy but alert. "Well," he rasped, "you two look like you've seen ghosts." Grace smiled, relief flooding through her. "You scared us," she said softly. Edward's gaze moved to Ethan. "You more than her?" "I think." Ethan stepped closer, his voice steady but quiet. "You need rest." Edward ignored that. "What I need," he said, "is to speak before this heart gives up again." The nurse left them alone. Grace hesitated, but Edward motioned for her to stay. "You two, my dear, you're part of this." He looked between them, eyes gentle but sharp. "I've built things all my life, companies, homes, legacies. But the one thing I nearly lost was time to love, time to forgive. Don't wait for love to be convenient." His words hung in the room like a prayer. Grace felt them land in her chest, quiet and heavy. She looked at Ethan, saw the flicker of something raw behind his composed mask. Edward's hand found hers. "You remind me of my late wife," he murmured. "She had a way of softening the hard edges in a room. Don't let this world harden you." "Grace." Tears blurred her vision. "I'll try." He smiled faintly, eyes closing again, his breathing evening out into sleep. For a long moment, neither she nor Ethan spoke. The machines kept their steady rhythm, a fragile proof of life. Grace sat back down, brushing at her cheeks. "He loves you, you know," she said softly. Ethan nodded, though his expression didn't change. "He loves who he thinks I can still be." "Maybe that's enough," she whispered. He looked at her then. Really looked. The harsh light softened around her face, catching the faint shimmer of tears, the quiet steadiness in her eyes. Something in him eased a wall he hadn't realized was still standing. "Why did you come tonight?" he asked suddenly. She blinked. "Because he needed me." And if it had been me, she hesitated. Then, quietly, "You didn't ask me to." The honesty hit harder than anger ever could. He turned back to the window, watching the faint glow of headlights sweep across the parking lot. "I don't know how to be what people need," he said, "not without breaking something." Grace set the book aside, standing slowly. She walked to him, close enough to see the tiredness around his eyes. "Maybe it's not about being what they need," she said gently. "Maybe it's about staying, even when it hurts." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it stilled him. He looked at her, searching for mockery, for pity found neither, only warmth. She smiled faintly, the kind that carried both kindness and sorrow. "You don't have to be perfect, Ethan. You just have to be present." The room went quiet again. The steady beep, the soft hum of the machines, the night pressing gently against the window. He exhaled slowly, his hand finding the edge of the window frame. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, with a voice so low she almost missed it, he murmured, "You make everything feel less cold." Grace's breath caught. The words weren't dramatic or planned. They sounded like they'd escaped him before he could take them back. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. She just stood there beside him, watching the first faint glow of dawn stretch over the hospital parking lot, and thought that maybe love wasn't always found in grand gestures. Sometimes, it began in the quiet of a night like this, where two people finally stopped running from themselves. The rain came slow and steady that night, a quiet percussion against the penthouse windows. The city lights blurred through the drops, gold bleeding into gray. Grace sat by the fireplace, her knees drawn close, a book open in her lap. She hadn't turned a page in for half an hour. The warmth didn't reach her hands. It hadn't for days. Not since the hospital. Not since she'd started realizing the difference between pretending to love someone and being unable to stop. Ethan came home later than usual. The door clicked softly behind him, but she didn't look up. She heard the rustle of his coat, the low sigh as he loosened his tie. The air changed when he entered a room always had. "You're still up," he said quietly. Grace smiled without lifting her eyes. "So are you." He crossed the room, stopping just behind the couch. Couldn't sleep. She turned then. His face was tired, pale in the dim firelight. There were faint shadows beneath his eyes, the kind that didn't come from lack of rest, but from too many thoughts left unsaid. Grace closed the book and set it aside. "How's your grandfather?" "Better," he said. Then, after a pause, "He keeps asking about you." Her smile softened. "He's kind." Ethan hesitated, his voice quiet. "He's right about you, though." She frowned slightly. "Right about what?" He met her gaze. "You have this way of making people believe things can get better." Grace's heart gave a small, uneven thud. "That's not true." "It is," he said. "You make everything softer." The words hung between them. fragile, almost accidental. For a moment, the only sound was the rain. She watched him, searching his face, trying to read what he wasn't saying. Then she took a breath, steady but trembling. "Ethan, I need to tell you something." He straightened slightly, uncertain. "What is it?" Grace stood, moving closer to the fire, her back half turned to him. The light traced gold along the edge of her hair. "When we signed that contract, I told myself it was just survival, that I was doing what I had to do. For my mother, for the bills, for sanity." Her voice thinned on that last word, but somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like a deal. She said softly, "It started feeling like us." Ethan didn't move. He didn't even breathe. She turned then, her eyes shining, steady but full of something raw. "I care about you, more than I should, more than this arrangement allows, and I can't keep pretending this is all business when every time you walk into a room, I forget how to act like it doesn't matter." The silence that followed was sharp, aching. Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to speak but couldn't find a place to start. Grace took another breath, almost a whisper now. "But I also can't live like this half real, half pretend. I can't love someone who only knows how to keep me at arm's length." Her words struck deep, deeper than he expected. His instinct was to retreat, to fix, to calculate, to control, but there was nothing in this moment he could fix, only feel. He finally said, "You think I don't care, I think you're afraid to," she said. The truth of it cut through the air. Ethan looked down, his fingers curling slightly. The fire crackled, the rain fell harder. When he spoke again, his voice was low, rough. "You don't understand what happens when I care for someone. When I was a kid, my father used to make promises he couldn't keep. He'd disappear for weeks, then come back like nothing happened. My mother forgave him every time until she didn't, and I swore I'd never be like him, that I'd never let someone depend on me just to end up disappointing them." He swallowed hard, his gaze distant. "So I learned how to build walls, how to control every part of my life so nothing could fall apart again. And then you—" He stopped. The words caught in his throat. Grace took a step closer. "Ethan." He looked up, and for the first time, the man who always looked unshakable seemed unsure. "You make me feel things I don't know how to manage," he said. "You make me want things I don't trust myself to keep." The air between them pulsed with quiet heat. She was close enough to see the faint stubble on his jaw, the flicker in his eyes. Neither spoke, neither moved away. Then, slowly, he reached up hesitant, almost afraid, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered, tracing the edge of her cheek. Her breath caught. Their faces were inches apart. He leaned in, so close she could feel his breath against her skin. The world narrowed to that moment, the warmth, the tremor, the pull. But he stopped. Just before the space closed between them, he pulled back, eyes clouded with conflict. Grace stood still, heart pounding. Why, she whispered. Ethan's voice was raw, quiet. "Because if I start, I don't know how to stop." Her eyes glistened. "Maybe that's not a bad thing." He looked away, his jaw tightening as though holding something in place. "You don't know what I break when I love someone." Grace's voice softened, breaking on the edge of pain. "Then maybe you've been breaking yourself instead." He closed his eyes, the truth of it sitting heavy between them. For a long time, neither spoke. The rain softened to a drizzle. The fire dimmed. She turned away first, her hand brushing her face. "I can't stay in something that hurts just because I want it to heal," she said. Ethan's gaze followed her, silent. When she reached the door, his voice stopped her, barely more than a whisper, rough and fragile. "I don't know how to love without ruining it." She froze, her fingers on the doorknob. For a moment, she didn't breathe. Then, quietly, she said, "Maybe that's what love is learning, how not to ruin it." And she left him standing there, alone in the flickering light, the sound of rain still tracing down the glass, soft as regret. The morning she left was gray and silent, the kind of morning where even the city seemed to hold its breath. Grace packed quietly folded sweaters, a few books, the framed photo of her mother she kept by the bed. Her movements were slow, careful, like she was afraid the walls themselves might break if she made a sound. Outside, the lake wind brushed against the windows, scattering thin trails of mist across the glass. The world looked washed out, colorless. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching her. He didn't ask where she was going. He already knew. Grace zipped the suitcase, her fingers trembling on the handle. "It's just for a while," she said softly, not meeting his eyes. He nodded, but his voice came rough. "You don't have to run." She turned to him then, her expression a mix of sorrow and exhaustion. "I'm not running. Ethan, I'm breathing." He flinched, just slightly. "I can't keep pretending we're fine," she went on. "Every time I walk outside, someone recognizes me. They whisper. They take pictures. I can't even visit my mother without security waiting in the hallway." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'm handling it. The PR team." She shook her head. "This isn't something you can fix with a statement." For a long moment, there was nothing but the low hum of the city below. Grace closed her suitcase, the latch clicking like an ending. "I need to remember who I was before all of this. Before contracts, before cameras." He stepped forward, close enough for her to feel the warmth of his breath. "And what about us?" Her voice cracked. "I don't know what we are anymore." The words lingered in the air like smoke. Then she brushed past him, the faint scent of her perfume trailing after her, soft and fading. When the elevator doors closed, Ethan stood alone in the penthouse. The silence pressed in. For the first time, the place felt too big. He moved to the window, looking out over the skyline. The city stretched on forever, glittering and distant. He used to find comfort in that view, its control, its order. Now it just looked like a reminder of everything he couldn't hold on to. Down below, a black car waited. Grace stepped into it, her hand trembling as she pulled the door shut. She didn't look up. She couldn't. The driver merged into traffic, and the city swallowed her whole. Days blurred after that. Ethan threw himself into work, into meetings, into anything that filled the quiet. The media still buzzed rumors, headlines, speculation, but he ignored them, or tried to. At night, he'd find himself staring at the empty chair across from his at dinner, the untouched cup of tea she used to leave half full, the faint impression of her hand on the railing near the window. Small ghosts of her lingered everywhere. Edward noticed first. "You look like a man who hasn't slept," he said when Ethan visited him at the estate. "I've been busy." Edward smiled faintly. "Busy isn't the same as whole." Ethan didn't respond. He'd forgotten what to say to comfort or be comforted. Meanwhile, Nathan moved quietly in the background. Rumors began circulating through the board about Ethan's instability, about damage control, about leadership in question, a subtle coup, polished and patient. Nathan played it perfectly, too perfectly. He approached investors with calm smiles and practiced concern. "The company needs steady hands," he said. "Personal matters shouldn't cloud judgment." By the time Ethan caught wind of it, half the board had been swayed. He called an emergency meeting, voice taut with authority that didn't reach his eyes. Grace's absence echoed in everything, even his words, even the way he breathed. That night, he met with his lawyer, Thomas, a man who'd known him since his 20s. The office was dim, the air heavy with exhaustion and the faint scent of whiskey. Thomas closed his folder. "Nathan's building momentum. He's been planting seeds for weeks." Ethan leaned back in his chair, fingers pressed to his temples. "He's been waiting for me to slip." Thomas hesitated. You have slipped. Just not in business. Ethan looked up sharply. What's that supposed to mean? Thomas sighed. It means you let someone in. And that's not something you do easily. Ethan's throat tightened. Grace has nothing to do with this. Thomas gave him a knowing look. You really believe that Ethan said nothing? The clock on the wall ticked, slow and deliberate. Outside, the rain had started again, soft against the windows. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice low. If I lose the company, I can build another one. But if I lose her... He stopped, the words catching in his throat. Then, almost to himself, he finished. If I lose her, I lose the only thing that ever mattered. Thomas said nothing. He didn't have to. Ethan stood and crossed to the window, watching the rain blur the city lights. Somewhere out there, Grace was probably staring at the same sky, trying to find peace in a world that wouldn't leave her alone. He pressed a hand to the cold glass. The reflection looking back at him wasn't the man who built empires. It was the man who forgot what it meant to keep someone instead of control them. For the first time in his life, Ethan Caldwell didn't know how to win. The only thing he knew was that he couldn't stand the silence she'd left behind, and if there was even the smallest chance of bringing her back, he'd have to fight not for power this time, but for the one person who made him feel human again. The boardroom was colder than usual that morning, the kind of cold that didn't come from air conditioning, but from tension thick, silent, waiting to break. The glass walls framed a gray skyline, clouds heavy over Chicago. Ethan stood at the head of the long table, tie perfectly straight, heart anything but. The seat beside him, the one Grace used to occupy during planning meetings, was empty. Nathan sat across from him, calm and smiling, a serpent in a tailored suit. Gentlemen, he began, voice smooth. We're here today to discuss the company's future, a future that requires stability, leadership without distraction. His gaze flicked briefly toward Ethan, the meaning sharp and deliberate. Ethan didn't flinch. Not this time. He'd spent weeks hollow, angry, numb. But somewhere in that emptiness, something had shifted. Maybe it was Edward's quiet faith, or the echo of Grace's voice telling him he still had a choice. Either way, he was done letting fear do the talking. When Nathan finished his speech, the room was quiet. The board members exchanged polite glances, avoiding Ethan's eyes. Ethan stepped forward. I appreciate your concern for stability, he said evenly. But stability doesn't come from silence. It comes from truth. He paused, letting the words settle. You've all heard the rumors, he went on. You've read the headlines. My personal life became public in a way that reflected poorly on this company. That's on me. I made choices, some calculated, some human, but none dishonest. A few heads lifted at that, the faintest murmur. Nathan leaned back in his chair. You admit the marriage was a business decision. Ethan met his gaze. I admit I entered it with conditions. But what began as a contract became something real. You can twist it, but you can't erase that. Nathan's smile didn't move. The shareholders might disagree. Then let them, Ethan said, his tone steady. Steel beneath restraint. Because what I've built here, what my grandfather started, wasn't founded on fear or image. It was founded on integrity. I forgot that for a while. But I'm done hiding behind boardroom walls. A few seats shifted. Someone cleared their throat. The tension cracked, faint but real. And then softly, from the doorway came a voice Ethan hadn't expected to hear. Neither am I. Every head turned. Grace stood there, framed by the doorway light, a calm steadiness in her eyes that made the whole room seem smaller. She wore no designer dress, no armor of luxury, just a simple navy coat and quiet resolve. Nathan's expression faltered. Mrs. Caldwell. To what do we owe the honor? She ignored him, her gaze fixed on Ethan. I didn't come here for a show. I came to tell the truth. Ethan's heart stuttered. He hadn't called her, hadn't dared to hope. But here she was, brave, real. Everything he'd tried not to need. Grace stepped forward, her heels soft against the polished floor. "I was part of that contract," she said. "And yes, it started as business. But it became more than that. Ethan Caldwell isn't perfect, but he doesn't lie. He doesn't manipulate. And he doesn't deserve to lose everything because someone wanted to see him fall." The board murmured again, louder now. Nathan shifted in his seat, the smile fading. Grace turned toward the members. "You all know his numbers, his results. But what you don't know is that behind those numbers is a man who never quits, who stayed at his grandfather's hospital bedside all night, who's rebuilt this company every time it tried to break him. The only thing he failed to do was protect his own heart." Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "You want to talk about leadership. Leadership isn't control, it's courage. And this man," her gaze softened toward Ethan, "has more of it than anyone I've ever met." The room was silent. Even the city outside seemed to pause. Nathan rose slowly. "Touching," he said. "But emotion doesn't change the fact that personal weakness," Grace interrupted, "is believing you can destroy someone by exposing their humanity." For the first time, Nathan had no reply. Ethan felt something shift in the air. The weight that had pressed on his chest for weeks began to ease. One breath at a time, the chairman cleared his throat. "Shall we proceed with the vote?" Papers shuffled, pens clicked. The room filled with the rustle of decision. Ethan stood still, eyes fixed on the window. Grace's presence beside him felt like a heartbeat, steady, grounding. When the results were read, the words came clear and simple. "The board has voted to retain Mr. Ethan Caldwell as CEO." Relief hit like oxygen. A low murmur of approval spread around the table. Nathan sat perfectly still. His smile didn't return. Ethan turned to Grace, disbelief flickering across his face before it softened into something else, something almost like wonder. She looked at him quietly. "I told you," she said. "You weren't alone." He exhaled, slow, the tension draining from his shoulders. "No," he said softly. "Not anymore." The meeting dissolved into handshakes and muted conversation, but the world around them blurred. Grace started to step back, to give him space, but he caught her hand lightly, just enough to make her stop. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Ethan's voice broke the silence. "We did it," he said, the faintest smile touching his mouth. Grace's fingers tightened around his. Together, outside, the clouds finally began to break. The first streak of sunlight touched the glass walls, casting light across the table where so much had nearly been lost. And in that moment, it wasn't about contracts or titles or control. It was about two people who had fallen apart and somehow found their way back. Not because they had to, but because they chose to. The night after the board meeting, the city seemed to breathe differently. The storm that had hung over them for months had finally begun to lift. From the penthouse windows, Chicago shimmered in quiet light, streets glistening, air calm after rain. Grace stood barefoot by the glass, her reflection mingling with the skyline. She didn't wear diamonds or silk tonight, just an old sweater, sleeves too long, soft at the edges, the kind of comfort she hadn't felt in a long time. Behind her, Ethan's footsteps were slow, almost unsure. He stopped a few feet away. "You came back," he said quietly. Grace smiled faintly, not turning. "You never asked me to." He exhaled, his voice low. "I didn't think I had the right." The silence between them wasn't cold anymore, just full, alive. She turned then, her eyes searching his face, the man who once hid behind polished words and perfect suits, now standing bare in the soft light, without armor. "Ethan," she said softly, "why did you fight for me?" He hesitated. Because losing you felt like losing myself. Her gaze held his, and the company. He shook his head. It doesn't mean a thing if I can't share it with someone who makes me feel human. Grace stepped closer. You think I make you human? I know you do, he whispered. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the city filled the spaces their words couldn't reach. Then she took a slow breath, her voice trembling just enough. We started this with papers and signatures and lies. I told myself it was survival, but she looked down, her fingers twisting together. Somewhere in the middle of pretending, I started wishing it was real. Ethan's voice was barely a breath. It is real. She laughed softly, half disbelief, half relief. Then why does it still feel so fragile? He moved closer until there was only a heartbeat between them. Because I broke too many things before I met you. I don't want to break this. Grace's eyes softened. You can't keep protecting me from the things that already hurt you. His hand lifted, hesitating before resting gently against her cheek. You don't know what I've done. What I've ruined? Then tell me, she said. Stop hiding from your own story. The air shifted. Ethan took a slow breath, his voice rough when it came. After my mother died, I blamed my father. He buried himself in work. He said the company was all we had left. I promised I'd do better. I'd build something no one could take from me. But the more I built, the more I lost. People became numbers. Feelings became weakness. Until you walked in, lost, nervous, wrong floor, and looked at me like I was someone worth believing in again. Grace blinked hard. You were? He shook his head. No, I was a man terrified of losing control. And now, he smiled faintly, the first honest one in what felt like forever. Now I'm terrified of losing you. Her breath hitched. He took her hands, fingers interlacing. There's no contract anymore, no deal, just this. Grace looked down at their joined hands, the same hands that once signed their arrangement, now trembling for an entirely different reason. She looked up, eyes shimmering. You really mean that? He nodded. You're not an obligation. You never were. You're my beginning. Something inside her broke softly like a knot, finally loosening. She reached up, tracing his jaw with her fingertips, her touch light as breath. You know, she whispered, I used to think love was something that had to be perfect, that it had to feel certain, like the ending of a story. He tilted his head, his voice quiet. And now I think it's just about showing up, even when it's messy, even when it's hard. Ethan smiled slow, unguarded. Then I'll show up. Every day, if you'll let me. She laughed softly, shaking her head. You sound like a man making promises again. Maybe I am, he said, but this time I know how to keep them. A pause, then, gently, he pulled her closer, the warmth of his chest pressed against her, the steady rhythm of his heart grounding everything that had ever felt uncertain. They didn't kiss at first. They just stood there, breathing in sync, two people learning how to stay. After a while, Grace whispered, Do you ever think about how strange it is that everything started because I walked into the wrong office? Ethan smiled against her hair. No, I think you walked into the right one. It just took me a while to deserve it. She leaned back enough to meet his eyes. You do? He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his thumb grazing her jaw. And you? She smiled softly. I'm learning that love doesn't have to be earned. The words hung there gentle, certain, true. Outside, the city lights shimmered brighter. The storm had washed everything clean. Grace pressed her forehead against his chest, her voice barely more than a breath. Maybe we were never pretending, she said. Maybe we were just finding our way home. Ethan closed his eyes, holding her a little tighter, as if afraid the moment might disappear. But it didn't. It stayed quiet, real, and beautifully imperfect. For the first time in a long time, neither of them felt lost. The garden behind Edward's estate bloomed brighter that spring than it had in years. Rows of tulips lined the stone path, their colors reflected in the quiet glass of the pond. The air smelled of pine and lilac, warm sunlight spilling gently through the trees. Grace sat on a wooden bench, her hands resting on her lap, listening to the sound of Edward's laughter drifting from the veranda. 6 months had passed since the storm, the meetings, the headlines, the hurt, and somehow, life had softened again. Edward had grown stronger, color back in his cheeks, his steps slower but sure. He spent his mornings walking the garden with a cane and his afternoons teaching Grace how to prune roses the way his late wife used to. "They grow best when you let them breathe," he'd say, eyes twinkling. She always smiled at that. It felt true in more ways than one. Mary had recovered too. Her health had been fragile for years, but now she cooked again, humming softly in the kitchen when Grace visited. Sometimes Grace caught her mother staring long, quiet looks filled with gratitude and guilt. "You've done well, sweetheart," Mary said one evening, squeezing Grace's hand. "I thought love had forgotten us." Grace only smiled. It didn't forget. Mom. It just took the long way around. And as for Ethan, he was different now. Still sharp, still confident, but lighter. He spent less time in the office, more time at the estate. He and Edward often sat together on the porch, whiskey in hand, talking like father and son, laughter spilling easily between them. There was peace now, where there had once been walls. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the oaks, Nathan arrived. His car pulled up quietly. No entourage this time, no smug grin waiting behind tinted glass. He stepped out in a plain gray suit, eyes tired, demeanor humble. Ethan met him halfway down the path. Neither spoke for a while. The wind rustled through the leaves, filling the silence. Nathan finally looked up. "You won," he said simply. Ethan's voice was calm. It wasn't about winning. Nathan nodded, gazed down. "I told myself I was fighting for the company, for legacy. But really, I just didn't want to feel like I'd lost again. I lost before I even started." There was no bitterness in his tone, only quiet surrender. Ethan studied him for a long moment, then reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to keep losing, Nathan. Not if you stop fighting ghosts." Nathan exhaled shakily. "I'm sorry. For everything." Ethan nodded once. "Then start from there." Grace watched from a distance, heart swelling. Forgiveness didn't come with grand gestures, she thought. Sometimes it was just two people choosing peace instead of pride. That night, the family gathered for dinner on the terrace. Edward insisted on toasting with real crystal glasses, even though his doctor would have scolded him for the champagne. "A celebration," he declared, "for no other reason than being here." Grace laughed as she refilled his glass with sparkling water instead. "You're pushing your luck, Mr. Caldwell." Ethan smiled beside her. "He's always been good at that." Dinner stretched into twilight, the sky painted in soft hues of rose and gold. Laughter mixed with the hum of crickets, warmth spilling from every conversation. As the plates were cleared, Ethan stood quietly and stepped closer to Grace. His hand brushed hers, a small, deliberate touch that made her heart skip. "Come with me," he murmured. She followed him down the stone path toward the edge of the garden, where fairy lights glowed faintly among the branches. The pond mirrored the stars beginning to appear, a thin veil of silver rippling across the surface. Ethan stopped, turning to face her. His expression was unreadable, part nervous, part tender. "Do you remember?" he began. "The first time I told you we were getting married." Grace let out a soft laugh. "You mean when you mistook me for someone else?" He smiled. "Yes, that." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. "I'd like to do it right this time." The words hit her before she even saw the ring. Her breath caught. "Ethan!" He stepped closer, his voice low. trembling slightly. No contracts, no conditions, no pretending, just love, just you. Tears welled before she could stop them. You don't have to, I know, he interrupted gently. That's why it means everything that I want to. He opened the box. The ring was simple, no diamonds, no extravagance, just a band of white gold, elegant and real. Grace Whitmore, he said softly. Will you marry me? For real, this time? The night seemed to pause around them. Grace's throat tightened. She could barely speak. You already know my answer, she whispered. Say it anyway. She smiled through her tears. Yes. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand steady now. When she looked up, his eyes were shining not with power or triumph, but with something gentler, deeper. From the veranda, Edward clapped his hands together, his voice carrying through the night. Well, it's about time, he called, laughter rumbling like thunder. Everyone laughed. Grace, Ethan, even Nathan, who stood quietly at the edge of the light. Edward raised his glass, the glow of lanterns catching in his eyes. To second chances, he said, voice warm and strong, and to love that chooses us, even when we don't choose it. The glasses clinked, the sound soft and bright, lingering in the air like a promise. Grace leaned against Ethan, her head resting on his shoulder. The stars stretched wide above them, and for the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel uncertain. It felt open, kind. The night settled around them, full of laughter, forgiveness, and quiet joy. And somewhere in the distance, the roses Edward had taught her to prune swayed in the gentle wind, blooming, free and alive. Morning light spilled softly through the curtains, tinting the kitchen in a warm gold. The scent of coffee and maple syrup lingered in the air. Grace stood by the stove, flipping pancakes while tiny hands tugged at her robe. A small laugh bubbled from her lips as she turned to see her son, dark curls sticking out in every direction, blue eyes wide and impatient. Almost done, little man, she said, balancing the spatula in one hand and reaching to wipe syrup from his cheek with the other. Across the room, Ethan sat at the table, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, holding a tiny spoon and pretending to negotiate with their 1-year-old over who got the next bite. You're ruthless, he said to the child, mock serious. You've inherited your mother's determination. Grace smiled. He inherited your appetite for control. Ethan chuckled, leaning back, his gaze softening as he watched her move about the kitchen. There were mornings when the memory of who they once were still surprised him, the man of contracts and walls, the woman of quiet resilience. Now, there was only this laughter, the hum of home, the steady rhythm of belonging. A drop of pancake batter sizzled on the stove. Outside, the city was waking horns in the distance, footsteps on the sidewalk, a bus sighing to a stop. Chicago's pulse was the same as always, but to Grace, it felt slower now, more forgiving. Ethan came up behind her, sliding an arm around her waist as she set the plate down. You're up early, he murmured against her hair. She turned slightly, resting her hand on his. He woke me up, again. Smart kid. She elbowed him lightly. You say that now. Wait until he starts asking for a pony. He grinned, kissing her temple. If he's anything like you, he'll find one in the wrong office and make it work. Grace laughed, shaking her head. The sound was light and full, the kind of laughter that came from peace, not pretense. After breakfast, she sat by the window with her son on her lap. The city spread wide before them, the same skyline she'd once seen from Ethan's office, now filtered through soft sunlight instead of tension. She traced little circles on the baby's palm as he drifted towards sleep, his breath warm against her chest. Ethan joined her, a mug in hand. He looks like you when he sleeps, he said. She smiled. You think so? Yeah? Peaceful. Like he already knows he's loved. Her chest tightened. But it wasn't sadness, it was the quiet ache of gratitude. "I never thought I'd have this," she said softly. "A home, a family." Ethan didn't answer right away. He set the mug down, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and said, "Neither did I." For a while, they sat in silence, listening to the slow breathing of their son. The world outside felt far away, its noise softened, its pace irrelevant. Inside, everything was simple. Grace looked around the apartment, the worn couch, the watercolor painting they'd picked up at a street fair, the toys scattered near the rug. There was no grand luxury now, no gleaming penthouse glass, but there was warmth, real warmth. Her eyes wandered to the old resume frame still hanging near the hallway. Ethan had insisted on keeping it the same resume she'd carried into Caldwell Tower that first day, folded and nervous in her hands. She remembered the sound of her heels on marble, the scent of coffee. The moment she stepped into the wrong elevator, the wrong office, the wrong life, by every measure she'd known. And yet, here she was. Ethan leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Penny for your thoughts." She smiled against his touch, just thinking how funny life is. You spend so much time trying to get everything right, and then one mistake changes everything. He looked at her with quiet affection. "The best wrong turn I've ever taken." She let out a soft laugh. "You didn't even take it." "I did. Doesn't matter. We both ended up here." The baby stirred slightly, a tiny hand curling around Grace's finger. She watched the small motion, her heart swelling. "He'll grow up in a world that's kinder," she said. "Or at least, I hope he will." Ethan nodded. "We'll make sure of it." They sat there for a long time, sunlight creeping higher, wrapping the room in gold. It wasn't the kind of happiness that shouts. It was quiet, steady, the kind that grows roots. Later, as Ethan cleared the dishes, Grace stood by the window once more, holding their son. The city glimmered beneath her feet, alive with stories, some beginning, some ending. Hers had done both. She kissed the child's forehead, breathing in the soft scent of milk and warmth. "You know," she whispered, "your dad and I met because I walked into the wrong office." The baby blinked sleepily, a faint smile curling at the corner of his lips. Grace's eyes softened. "But somehow," she said quietly, "I found the life I was meant to live." The city exhaled, sunlight spilling through the glass like a blessing. Ethan's laughter drifted from the kitchen, warm and real. Grace closed her eyes for a moment, letting the stillness settle. In that breath, everything aligned: the noise, the silence, the past, the present. It was enough. And in that small Chicago apartment, on a golden morning filled with pancakes and love, the woman who once got lost had finally found her way home. Sometimes, life's most beautiful beginnings come disguised as mistakes. Grace walked into the wrong office, but she found the right life, a reminder that not every wrong turn means we've lost our way. Many of us spend years trying to plan everything perfectly, to stay in control, to avoid pain. Yet the moments that change us most often arrive unannounced, through confusion, through chance, through the people we never expected to meet. This story reminds us that love isn't about perfection or timing. It's about courage, the courage to stay, to forgive, to begin again. It's also about seeing value in ourselves and others, even when the world misjudges us. As we grow older, we start to understand that peace doesn't come from having everything figured out. It comes from letting go, trusting the journey, and believing that even the wrong doors can lead us home. So, when life surprises you or takes you somewhere you didn't plan to go, pause, breathe. Maybe it's not a mistake at all. Maybe it's life, gently guiding you toward what your heart has been waiting for all along. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it touched your heart, even just a little, I hope you'll share it with someone who might need a gentle reminder that second chances and quiet kindness still exist in this world. Your support means everything. It helps us keep creating stories that bring warmth, reflection, and a bit of hope into everyday life. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story. Until then, take care of your heart and keep believing in the beauty of unexpected beginnings.